So the question on the virtual table today is what will change in the world after we go back to some semblance of normal, or at least until we find ourselves in a situation where we do not have to meet and work in the format in which we are meeting at the moment. Certainly, we can hope that we will all work, live, and recreate, not just in a safer way, but in a way that is more sustainable in a deep sense, that truly allows us to make use of the world we have inherited without using up non-replenishable natural resources, and that we will do so in a way that is open, equitable, and just, that encourages people of all races and all classes and all kinds to be part of an open discussion, and also makes all of the facilities and all of the possibilities that our culture and our society has to offer available to everyone in an open manner. And finally, we also hope that also through the talents of the many Hokies here, as well as other people listening in, will be able to do so in a way that will be more beautiful. We certainly know that some things have already changed and will probably change, and certainly some of them also will be very superficial, quite literally, I would say, in the sense that we are going to and have already seen a great deal of emphasis on finding ways to make our existing objects, images, and spaces safer for all of us, and to streamline them and cleanline them. Now, streamlining and cleanlining are aesthetic terms, but they're also design terms, and they have a history that goes back to previous attempts to try to find ways to express the fact that design could make the world around us work not only more efficiently, but more safely, and in a way that was more open. Of course, we also are going to be looking forward to both more closed and more open spaces, a very perhaps opposed situation. But as we're already seeing the proliferation of both smaller bubbles around restaurants and large bubbles, such as our dome right outside here in Kogel, so we will probably see a lot more differentiation between enclosed bubble-like spaces and the open, undifferentiated space of modernism expanding to encompass ever more of the globe. Again, like streamlining, not something that has appeared today, but something that has been theorized by philosophers ranging from Peter Sloterdijk to Benjamin Bratton, and that we have seen in operation already. We also will probably be seeing an emphasis on, well, not probably, we already are seeing an emphasis on community and on the need to gather and to have spaces and objects that connect us socially, rather than just having places where and objects that allow us to work, live, and recreate in isolation. And of course, we also believe that the design tasks that we face have to address the larger issues of sustainability, social equity, and openness, and the necessity of making a more beautiful and open world for all of us. To speculate on how that might happen, or perhaps even whether that might happen, we are joined by 4 experts from very different areas, and I will introduce them, I guess, alphabetically, and maybe also ask them to speak alphabetically just for 10 minutes. Our first panelist is Kona Gray, based in Fort Lauderdale, a principal at the landscape and planning firm of EDSA, and a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects. Kona Gray has worked in just about every scale of landscape and planning, from the very small scale to large community projects and large resort and corporate projects. He also has worked in every kind of project, from private commissions to working for large healthcare institutions and campuses, and is currently working all across the world, in China, in the Arab Peninsula, and in places all across the United States. And he is able to do all of this because he was well trained at the Boston Architectural College, or maybe it was then still the Boston Architectural Center, and at the university, and at the Savannah College of Art and Design, SCAD, and the University of Georgia. Nienke Hoogvliet is with us from The Hague in the Netherlands, at least I assume it's The Hague, somewhere in the Netherlands, where it is very late, so we are especially grateful that she's with us. It is also an election night, I believe, or beginning of an election in the Netherlands. Nienke is a designer and artist who was trained at the Willem de Koning Academy, and has built very quickly, I might add, an international reputation for work that exists at the intersection, I would say, between recycling, upcycling, or rethinking objects, learning from nature and from natural systems and from the properties of natural objects, and a conceptual bent that rethinks the basic elements out of which a design is made. And her work, which has she's mainly gained notoriety for work in seaweed and with fish skins, has been collected by such museums as the Cooper Hewitt in New York, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and the Virginia and Albert Museum in London. In other words, by all of the most important design collections in the world. That's quite impressive. Linda Sorrento is a fellow of the American Society of Interior Designers and also a member of the IIDA. She is speaking to us from Charlotte, North Carolina. Linda had a astonishing, long and varied career given her young age, designing commercial interiors for corporate clients before turning her attention to sustainability and working at the the United States Green Building Council and developing some of their central standards, especially for office interiors. She was trained at Syracuse University, where she obtained a BFA, and she has her master's in interior design from Marymount University. She's also taught at George Washington University and Northern Virginia Community College, among other places. And finally, we have with us Mark Tsurumaki. And just before this started, we were remarking that he went to the other school in Virginia, the place where gentlemen are supposed to go. So we still are, despite that, looking forward to hearing what he has to say. After graduating from the University of Virginia, or the university, he went on to Columbia University. And I believe it was there, hooked up with the two Lewis twins, to form Lewis Tsurumaki Lewis, a firm based in New York that in 2001 won the Cooper Hewitt's National Design Award, and whose work has also been collected by such places as the Museum of Modern Art New York and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I would say that LTL is known not only, though, for their quite beautiful designs, which seem to be getting bigger and more complex every year, but also for their published work, and in particular for something that's become a bit of a Bible to many students here, the Manual of Section, which they followed up this year with the Manual of Social Distancing, which is, I believe, one of the most both graphically and conceptually well-conceived guides to how we actually can design in a COVID-19 informed world, if we can put it in that way. All right, with that much too long introduction, I will now turn it over to Kona Gray and ask him to share with us for just a few minutes, and I will cut you off if you go on for too long, some of your thoughts on where we might be going.
Thank you, Aaron, for that wonderful introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I've got a very short presentation that I'll run you through to sort of help foster the conversation we'll have shortly. Can you all see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again. I'm Kona Gray. I'm a principal with EDSA Incorporated, and I'm delighted to be with you all. I'd like to also thank Kelly for helping getting all this organized and bringing us all together. I think the conversation we're going to have is actually very timely, as we're all dealing with a lot of different changes that we didn't anticipate. It's probably one thing that has really resonated with me for about a decade now. And the title of my little short talk here is exploration, because it's something we've been looking at in order to find equal ground for everyone. So real quickly, a little bit about me. I'm from a small country in West Africa called Liberia. I was actually born here in the US. My parents had immigrated to the US for their education. This is a 1970, early 1970s vintage image of myself and my family. My parents were wrapping up graduate studies at the University of Washington in Seattle, getting ready to head back to Africa to continue our lives. My dad is an architect, so I grew up in the profession. He's 80 years old, still practicing, and he does use Revit. He has all the latest technology and loves the profession. I don't think he'll ever retire. But I spent many of my summers in his design studio working with architects from around the country. This woman in particular here taught me a lot. She's from Russia and she's a really fantastic designer. Over the years, we've learned a lot in our practice, and one thing that is true is that we are becoming a lot more human in the way we do our work. For one thing that I find really refreshing is that more and more our clients and the communities are very involved in our projects. It used to be where we could fly in, do what we do as the ultimate designers and continue on, and everybody was happy, and we are so much more engaged with our clients and so much more engaged with our consultants. This is an image from a project we completed here in South Florida, working with Catherine Gustafson from GGN and Michael Wurtzel from Foster and Partners, and that's John Backman in the background with CBT, who was the owner's rep. It's just shown us a lot in terms of collaboration and sort of coordination with as many designers as we possibly can. I've also done quite a bit of work with ASLA, especially as it relates to bringing more awareness to the profession and having conversations that are kind of tough. This is a conversation in 2016 in regards to designing with diversity, which was never on the national stage for ASLA until this date, and it was a really therapeutic conversation. I've certainly enjoyed as much time as I possibly can with students. I have been up to Blacksburg for one of the sessions there, and this is a image from the University of Washington design thinking workshop I did with about 20 students over a weekend, just talking about design and life and sketching and how it all works and comes together. These are the things that really make me appreciate what we do. But our work is pretty varied. I mean, a lot of people know us for resorts. We do resorts, but we also do several other types of projects, such as this aquarium that we collaborated with Cambridge 7 and Associates on through concept and schematic, or the Norton Museum, as I mentioned before, with Foster and Partners, or even a streetscape project that we're actually is under construction now in Savannah, Georgia. So it was great to come back to Savannah and work very closely with many people who are really focused on the integrity of architecture in their space. Or larger projects such as this 5,000-acre Central Park in Cairo as a part of their new capital. And for me, projects like this that are probably the most rewarding, a pro bono project where we're able to transform a vacant lot into a fantastic park for very deserving residents. But we all know that we are approaching a new normal. It's a normal that we actually were looking forward to as landscape architects for quite some time, to see bluer skies and more appreciation for the environment and getting people back outside. I've done quite a few of these conversations via Zoom, but one of the things that I found very amazing is being able to connect. These are mentees that I conversate with on quite a bit, just about where we are and what's going on in life. Back in July of 2020, EDSA was approached by the city of Baltimore at our Baltimore studio, put together a concept to kind of help with social distancing and creating spaces for people to be outside, because I think that we finally realized that there is some very important aspects of being in that public realm. And recently read an article in Arc Daily about where architecture is going. And I've never seen kind of a separation. I've always seen this blurred line, sort of interrelationship, as Marco Brzovic talks about here, and how we need to coexist with our environment and not fight it. But I think we're going to continue to see some very fantastic, fascinating ideas of where architecture can go on a large scale, but certainly definitely on a small scale. And we have been very fortunate to meet and engage with very young entrepreneurs that are starting ideas and starting companies that really relate to the conversation in regards to equity. This company was started by 4 young landscape architects that just wanted to do something a little bit more. Or companies like Biohabitats that really focuses on nature-based solutions. That's the only type of work they do. Or another company that really has inspired me in their work, Mass Design Group in Boston, as they have reached really beyond the frame of just architecture and really shown how we can blur the lines. But I know this exploration is going to continue. This image is from the area where the Sahara Desert meets the Atlantic Ocean, and we have so much ground to cover, but so much more to do, I believe, as individuals. Someone's drawing on my screen, or is that me? This image also resonates, as we know that climate change is an issue. It is something that we have discussed for quite some time, but we know it's something that we need to take care of now. And then obviously we've all been dealing with this pandemic. We've sort of awakened to what it means to be healthy. And finally, the trifecta is dealing with issues of race. Once again, it's not new. It's something that I deal with as an African-American man, and know that we can do better and look forward to that future, especially a future that's bright for my daughter. She's 14 now. This image was from 4 years old, and she is a true person of connection to several different cultures, from Native American to Scandinavian to West African. And I know that this is the future that we will all thrive together. Thank you.
Thank you, Kona. Before I let you go, I just want to ask one sort of clarifying question.
Sure.
It seems to be that you're indicating that we should really be looking at the intersection between issues of equity or diversity, issues of ecology or global climate change, and issues of health. And that sort of should be the place of operation for design. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And it seems as though we've sort of lost track of that over the years, just focusing into the silos of design related to different disciplines, not fully engaging the full capacity of us all when we work well together. So that's a definite, because the environment is affected by humanity, and humanity is affected by the environment. These things do roll together.
Great. All right. Thank you, Kona. We will come back to you.
Right.
Nienke, can I ask you to take the stage next?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. I'm very excited to be here and yeah, to talk about this topic. I think it's very interesting that even though I'm in the Netherlands, I'm experiencing probably exactly the same as all of you. Yeah, I prepared a presentation also, so I will share my screen as well. I can unfortunately not make it bigger than this, so I hope that's okay. Yeah, Aaron already gave me a great introduction, I think. I'm Nienke Hoogvliet. I'm the founder of Studio Nienke Hoogvliet, a design studio from the Netherlands, and our goal is to shape new perspectives through design. A quick introduction. Yeah, this is what we talk about, but about the work that we made. I selected just 3 projects to quickly describe. This is, I think, one of the most famous projects, the See Me rug. It's made from seaweed yarn, knotted by hand in a discarded fishing net to symbolize, on one hand, what the kind of issues we have with the oceans and all the plastic waste, and on the other hand, such a beautiful material as seaweed that can be a great new resource for even textiles. So I try to capture this solution and problem in one object to not give only a negative message that we have to be more careful with plastic waste, but also to show potential and give hope for the future. And this is a stool made from fish leather. It's a waste product, especially in the Netherlands. We don't really like to eat the skin of the fish. In some countries, it's very different, but here it's considered waste. And this is one salmon. So you can see the 2 sides of the salmon skin here. And actually, it's very strong. So that's one of the most beautiful qualities of this material. And that's why I designed this stool to show that quality of this material. And there are thousands and thousands of kilos of fish skin thrown away every day here, just in the Netherlands, while it can be turned in a natural way without any chemicals into a beautiful material like this. So I think it's very important that we start to think our use of materials. And I think the most extreme project that shows this as an example was a collaboration with the Dutch water authorities. So that's the part of the Dutch government that is in charge of cleaning our wastewater. And they reclaim used toilet paper from the wastewater. So basically you have paper pulp again, that they clean in also a completely natural way, so without any chemicals. And it's then, yeah, paper that you can use for almost anything again. But of course, this is a very big shift in our accepting new materials, that we can even use something disgusting as used toilet paper as a valuable material again. And today I want to talk not about my work, but about how COVID-19 will change the way we need to interact with design and materials, because I think we're at a crucial moment for the world. We need to step up, and materials is a great start, I think. So if Corona has taught me one thing and made more clear, I hope, to everybody, is that we're all connected. We watch nature take its course, and yeah, the whole world is affected by the same problem. And it all started with one person. This is a drawing, it's not even finished because I got a bit lost in how quickly it spreads. But here it's a visualization of how quick COVID spreads. It starts with one person, it gives it through 3 other persons, and that way it will spread so rapidly. One person in China started with eating maybe a bat. It's something from nature that now affects all of us. So for me, this is a very important thing to keep in mind. But after this pandemic, we get a new challenge, and that's climate change. And I wish we can only treat it with the same urgency as we're treating COVID at the moment, because the climate change is probably even more deadly and more devastating than COVID-19 will be. This is, I think, a very nice quote from the trend forecaster Linda Sorrento, who puts it in a very straight sentence. And COVID has already a huge impact on how we're dealing with materials at the moment. Not only has the plastic packaging increased a lot already, but also all the waste that is produced because of Corona, articles that are needed for healthcare. And of course, it's very logical that we need all these materials at the moment because we need to stay healthy, but it's all very short-term solutions. Think, for example, about all the face masks that are now ending up in nature. I found this number that if we only do not properly dispose 1% of all the face masks, and that's what's currently happening. We already have 40,000 kilo. I'm not sure, sorry, how much that it's in pounds, but every month that ends up in our natural environment, and there it can cause damage to animals, and it will take 400 years to decompose. And plastics don't even fully decompose. They only break down into microplastics or nanoplastics. And that way they stay into our system, maybe for eternity, and they will affect our health in such a big way that I think it's really a serious threat, and even a more big threat than COVID is at the moment. And I think as designers, we have such a big responsibility to design for the long term. We need to understand that we need to create value instead of waste. And as one example, I think plastics are materials that are so often misused in design. They are used in single-use products or in other products that don't last for a very long time. But plastics is actually a material that lasts a lifetime, or even more than a lifetime. It lasts centuries. So as a designer, I think it's so important that we consider what a material's properties are, so we use them in the right way. And if we don't do that, it will come back to us. Here you can see this fish with all the plastics in his body. And of course, we all have seen images like this already, probably a lot, but it's just a great symbol of how we are all connected. We will eat the fish, the plastics will enter our body, and we might get sick from it too. So this is a very good example of how we are all connected again. And that's why I want to say tonight, let's spread change, let's spread considered design, think about bigger pictures than just your own topic. Try to see the whole holistic vision, and I hope that way we can spread change together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nienke. For you as well, just one question. You've talked about the necessity of connectedness, and that seems to talk about understanding that plastic lasts a long time, and so we should use it for things that last a long time. Fish skin should be reused, but you begin and end by talking about human connectedness. How does the design process, or what you design, allow for that human connectedness?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I understand the question completely.
Well, you show objects and products that show how we can connect to nature very clearly. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering how they connect us to each other, or how, if it starts from one person, does it just start by each of us reusing or designing for reuse, or is there some way that design actually brings us together or creates social connection?
Yeah, I think for me that's a very automatic next step, because when you look at the design process from a holistic point of view, you also look at production, that it happens in a sustainable or social way, that your interaction with your client has a meaning, and that way you're not only making a product, but you're building a community in your, you have interaction with many different aspects from your, from your production process maybe. So yeah, I think it's really all also so connected, even with the social aspect and the connection between humans. Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Linda, the word is to you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen as well. So my presentation looks at interior design and its relationship to the pandemic, as well as to a collaborative group. I'm heading up a group for ASID, and looking at what tools can be created for the profession moving forward as a result of lessons learned. And so I was struck last week by, it was a year anniversary that the World Health Organization declared coronavirus. And that number of 530,000 is the size of, that death is the size of Baltimore, or the size of Atlanta, or the size of Tucson. Just an amazing statistic that just takes our breath away. That statistic also a year ago mobilized a collaboration among all the organizations in the built environment. We mobilized very quickly to determine what information we need to know in order to address the pandemic in the built environment. And ASID was one of those organizations. So in July 2020, ASID convened a group of experts in interior design and technical experts. I had up that group to study what was actually going on in COVID-19 as it relates to interior design, and what tools could we create as a result to not only address the current COVID-19, as well as what could happen in the future as it relates to interior design. So we developed a process, and at this point, we've gone through a framework and we've done an investigation. We're in the process right now of creating issue briefs and working in sync with other organizations in a collaborative effort. And ultimately, we're going to bring this together as for the future for sustainability and health and resilience. So if we look at this illustration from the Washington Post, and you can see the scope of what's occurring as far as past to today, as far as COVID-19, and the scope of what has occurred. And lessons learned from the 1918 flu doesn't look that much different than lessons learned today, amazingly so. So bringing the indoors out, separating, masking. And today what has occurred is that schools, the movement of schools going outdoors and within nature is occurring, a natural environment to do work, going back in a masked environment, and actually cafes emerging. There's 14th Street in Washington, DC has been blocked off, and all the cafes have brought they're eating outdoors. And now with the vaccination in sight, what is the outlook for people and buildings? What's next? How are we opening? How are we going to prepare? Our existing buildings sufficient? What are the precautionary measures? What are lessons learned? What are approaches that will last? And what can we build on? These are questions that all the organizations are looking at. And if we look at a time frame of this, we have a scope of over 5.6 million commercial buildings that we have to address, with most of them 15 years or older. And that tenant space is being looked at as the expiration of commercial interiors as far as LEED certification. Leases are up. What are we going to do with that? I was in a conversation last week with the National Institute of Health, and we talked about the cost of renovation is almost impossible to accomplish. So what are those short-term recovery? What are major building renovations? And what are long-term future-proofing of buildings? BOMA, the International Society of Building Operations and Managers, conducted a study in September and October 2020. And one of the key findings was 74% believe that the in-person office is really vital. So what steps do we need to take to understand how to make those spaces safe and ensure the return, the trusted return of occupants? So our impact review task force broke up into 4 different key topic areas with representations of large and small firms, designers that are practitioners, academics, and researchers to study these issues. We actually had 200 submitted studies and 62 accepted research submissions. And we looked at them as critical, relevant, innovative, and trusted information that we vetted in a 4-step vetting process. And we determined that a framework of taking our critical impact-driven areas of health and well-being, building systems, technology, interior design, context, facilities, and change management, actually have and apply scales to them of person, facility, organization, and community, actually developed a framework of trust, innovation, practice, leadership, and what to do in the future. And if we looked at health and well-being, that the human-centric filter for health and well-being could build trust in that space. So considerations of neurocognitive, psychosocial, and physical all combined actually develop new approaches to measure our return to our office space. And studies were showing that this connection with nature is important, and thermal and comfort, indoor air quality. We've known this for many years in water and waste management and urban waste management and automation, indoor building and finished materials. We've known this. The Well Institute created their WELL certification around this. Our question today is COVID an actual driver for this? And building systems design and technology, this is where innovation lies. And looking at the CDC's traditional control pyramid that they developed well before 2015 is an important starting point for us to consider where does the interior design fall as far as elimination, engineering controls, administrative controls, and what of these are so effective. And when we're thinking about following the science, we need to avoid unintended consequences. So when you look at this image, this is a scary image that someone would be going through a facility with something that has a warning on it that UVC light can be absorbed by organic molecules that may cause damage to the skin and retina. And how could this be some technology that some human would take through an occupied or unoccupied space and be brave enough to do that? So this is mind-boggling that we would have technology like this. Some of the other technologies that we're testing out now, we've known copper has been very well received as eliminating organisms under a short period of exposure. So Corning Glass has developed an antimicrobial additive that can be dosed into paints. But is this a tested technology? Or does it have unintended consequences? And instead of a human with the cart with UV rays, or robotic disinfection with UV light, is that a better solution with technology and disinfection? And then the whole host of indoor environmental quality control strategies are being looked at. And finally, we're able to put in play, as far as for interior design, the question of what are the partitions doing? What about personal environmental control systems, disinfectants and surface material coatings, and increase the level of protection and different protection and prevention scenarios that we've been thinking about for so many years. And again, COVID giving us the opportunity to put these in play for the future. And looking at the context of interior design, some of the aspects or considerations we must think about as far as space. So infection prevention, materiality, communication, technology, navigation, proxemics, and storage, and how does that play into space? And then facilities and change management is also about leadership and how we engage in protocols in that space. How can we enable and energize people to actually, in the case of during COVID, wear masks, in the case afterwards that they put in place the processes and technologies and workplace strategies that will make that a safe and healthy space. And then as far as design for the future, looking at codes and incentives and materials and waste and workforce, and how we can have those as drivers after COVID, making space again a trusted and safe place and healthy place to work. And so some quick take-home messages from this project of the 37 subject matter experts and researchers is that evidence-based design tools and processes based on science and not unintended consequences can be applied to advance human-centric results through the strong word of trust, collaboration, and multidisciplinary approach with all the folks that are here today, and of course, innovation. And with that, I thank you and turn it back to our host.
Thank you so much, Linda, because I'm hoping that we can have a little bit of discussion. I'm going to turn it over directly to Mark. If Mark is ready, able, and willing.
Sure, thanks, Aaron. I know we're time is always an issue, so I'll jump right into it here. Share my screen. So as Aaron mentioned in the introduction, and thank you, by the way, Aaron, for inviting me today. I am one of the partners in LTL Architects. We're a New York-based design-intensive architectural office. A lot of our work involves institutional, academic, and cultural projects, and really a range from interiors to the renovation and repurposing of existing and historic buildings to kind of new construction. But historically, our office is also engaged in ongoing longer-term research projects that are more internally driven by our own kinds of curiosities and obsessions, and often kind of explored through techniques of architectural representation. This, for example, is a project that we did a number of years ago for the Museum of Modern Art, looking at coastal sea level rise and the impact, in this case, on New York City in particular. And as Aaron already mentioned, a lot of these projects result in publications like the Manual of Section, which was about a 4 or 5 year enterprise that preoccupied many people in our office over that duration, and also kind of embodies our preoccupation with questions of architectural representation specifically, and in this case, the way that drawing operates to reveal the kind of vertical organization of buildings and what that might allow us to kind of reconceive in a more prospective way. And so when we were faced, as all of us were, with the advent of the pandemic and the shutdown now roughly a year ago, we began to sort of think about what we could do, how we could contribute to kind of discourse in the context of this sort of emerging public health crisis. And eventually we undertook what became the Manual of Physical Distancing, which I'll talk briefly about tonight. We like manuals, I guess. And it was undertaken with funding from Princeton University in collaboration with the engineer Guy Nordenson, who is a frequent collaborator of ours, Princeton, and eventually evolved into a 211-page document that looked at various aspects of space-time in cities in the era of COVID-19. One of the kind of initial impetuses for this was really, I think, like everyone, we were sort of inundated with a lot of confusing information at the outset of the pandemic, and we're trying to make sense of it. And we thought that one of the ways that as architects we could be productive, since we weren't obviously epidemiologists or scientists, was in the realm of visualization, and how we could begin by graphically creating kind of legible graphic documentation, drawing on the tools of architectural representation, dimensional accuracy, to look at things like large droplet versus aerosol transmission, to look at the efficacy of mask wearing, the impacts of speech, questions of surface duration of the virus, how it impacted typical indoor environments, even beginning to graphically illustrate in dimensionally and spatially accurate ways some of the important case studies that looked at transmission, where the mechanisms for transmission began to be kind of clearer. And this is all kind of in the context of a kind of a real-time kind of changing condition, how that relates to mechanical systems and ventilation, how strategies like Linda was referring to in terms of UV light could be implemented to help mitigate that. And also the varying kind of standards and recommendations that began to emerge around social distancing and the dimensional parameters required to prevent or mitigate infection, how those related to the existing spatial context that we all inhabit, and in this case, the academic environment, and how we could begin to look at the questions of density, the relationship between proximity, PPE, access to mechanical and natural ventilation, and just this sort of question of how spaces could be reoccupied more safely. And as well as the kind of unknowns involved in that, which I think continue in many ways to this day. We also became very interested, partially because we're architects who live and work in New York City and have based our practice there. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, of the impacts of COVID on the city in particular. So we were kind of faced with this sort of seemingly intuitive relationship between the density of the city and the, let's say, the speed of and severity of transmission. And there was a kind of assumption at the outset of the pandemic that these two things were kind of congruent, right? And we were concerned about this as people who value the very interface and exchange that the city represents and the seeming threat that posed relative to a pandemic. In fact, at the end of the day, that's ended up to not be true. And in fact, there isn't a kind of scientifically verifiable one-to-one correspondence between density and transmission. And in fact, metropolitan areas actually do better in many ways relative to mortality rates than urban and rural or than suburban rather and rural areas, due to presumably the access to well-developed health systems and infrastructure and resources. But we were, seeing outside of our doors and doorsteps the impacts on the city and the way that the occupation of the city was changing and how people were both adapting their behaviors and spaces were converting relative to the requirements of COVID. So we began to look at things like recommendations for the utilization of outdoor public spaces like parks for large-scale gathering, the way that spaces like playgrounds and sports courts could become a new form of multi-programmatic public amenity. And specifically, and I think we're all quite familiar with this now, the way that the street could begin to respond to the requirements of reduced density relative to social distancing in the way that necessitated a kind of re-territorialization of the street away from the predominance of the street as a territory predominantly for cars, and growing importance of kind of pedestrian occupation, of alternative means of transportation like cycling, and the kind of now familiar transformation of the street into a kind of occupiable public space, which no longer is just a kind of a conduit for transportation, but now could provide venues for a variety of uses, from markets to playgrounds and from shorter term to kind of longer term conversions of streets, looking at different scales of street, different typologies of street, from residential to large scale avenues, and different kind of functionalities that could begin to occupy in longer and more rapid durations, let's say the repurposing of streets, the kind of repertoire of deployable temporary architectures that could be used to kind of reorganize those public spaces, and then the impacts on the kind of public infrastructures of transportation, and the way that push towards something we would advocate for in any case, which is a greater degree of reliance on human-based forms, human-powered forms of transportation like cycling, and thinking about how the advent of COVID could in fact be used as a positive spur for, in a way, accelerating the network of bike pathways throughout New York City. We also engaged, knowing, of course, that the pandemic disproportionately impacted communities of color in underserved areas of the city. We undertook, in collaboration with a group called Neighborhoods Now, a pro bono project to assist the community and the bid in Jackson Heights, Queens, on 82nd Street, to look at the repurposing of that street for commercial, restaurant, and public uses, and worked with the community to kind of work through code, logistics, and interface with the city to help get this project effectuated for them. We also looked at the history of pandemics, and this is not obviously a new condition. Diseases, humans, and cities have come together across time in many different ways. And I won't go into depth here, but we looked at everything from the lazarettos in Venice, which evolved as a kind of, in a way, landscape building typology that acted as spatial valves for the transfer of people of goods in and out of Venice during the 15th through 17th centuries relative to the bubonic plague. We looked at the evolution of the hydrological infrastructure of New York City in relationship to the cholera outbreaks of the 1800s, in the way that the water systems and sanitary systems in the city, as well as the standards and codes regulating housing, like the Housing Act of 1867, actually evolved in response to, in that case, a specific disease event. And the evolution of kind of quarantine islands in the city and new building types, in this case, the polio hospitals on a Roosevelt Island, or in this case, Duiker's Hilversum Sanatorium, where there was a kind of co-evolution, if you will, of new architectural typologies, modernist principles of access to light and air for health and hygiene, in response to specific public health concerns, in the case of the sanatorium, of course, tuberculosis. And we're really, I think, although this may seem like a bit of a historical sidebar, what interested us here is the way that urgent responses to more imminent public health demands fostered or facilitated longer-term evolution in cities worldwide, historically, that actually led to better infrastructure, to more sanitary public spaces, to an increase in public health, to more equitable and inclusive housing, et cetera, et cetera. So as we were going through our research on COVID-19 and thinking about its impacts, we were simultaneously thinking about how can this, obviously very negative, tragic circumstance actually be leveraged opportunistically to generate and accelerate changes that in fact can have longer term benefits. And so just to end, because I'm going on too long, just a few questions. I don't really want to provide answers, but I think there are a lot of fascinating questions here. I'll just go through them very quickly. What of our city's streets could become multi-programmatic, inclusive public spaces for people rather than primarily conduits for cars? How could an emphasis on accessible and seasonably adaptable exterior public space create a more beneficial balance between the urban and natural environment? What of a renewed recognition of the importance of sunlight, fresh air, and a more permeable relationship between inside and outside allowed us to reconceive the architectural envelope? What if the already existing but accelerated shifts in programmatic uses of interior space, such as the enforced collapse of living and working that we've all experienced, could allow a broader reconceptualization of how we think about function, temporality, and adaptability in our buildings? And ultimately, how do we avoid designing for the last crisis and engage uncertainty as a productive catalyst for thinking architectural commonplaces of stability, duration, and permanence? So I will stop there, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mark. I hope we could have a little bit of a discussion. I know it's late in the day, especially for Nienke, but hope you'll stick with us for a little bit.
Don't worry.
Okay. The thing that concerns me, just sort of riffing on what you said at the end, Mark, but what several of you brought up, is that while we're hopeful about all the great things that we can do, there are two things that concern me. One is, where's the money going to come from? All of this involves an investment in having buildings that have lower occupancy, surfaces that have high properties. We all know that reuse and recycling is actually quite often more expensive. All these kind of things take a lot of investment, but also philosophically, this problem that any connection or involvement with the natural world or with human beings means risk. And as designers, we are taught, but also codes mandate that we manage risk. And isn't there a contradictory impulse towards wanting to bring people together with each other and with nature, which is something all four of you talked about, and the need to minimize the kind of risks that come with that kind of connection, that kind of direct activity, whether it's from, where in this case, just directly from disease, whether it's from disease in the dirt or from the miasmic air, as they used to think, or whether it's from a handshake or hug. So those would be my two questions to any of you who want to pose it. How do we manage that contradiction, and where's the money going to come from?
Aaron, if I could start, you know, it's interesting.
Sure.
A lot of this conversation is about landscape architecture. I know that Mark did a very good job of giving us some historical context. You know, Central Park was derived from that 1832 cholera outbreak. In an effort to provide clean air and sunlight for people in the city to live in a more hospitable way. So it does seem as though the money will come when there are issues of this nature that drive us to essentially focus on sort of the greater good. It's easy for us to get caught up in you know, what can we do today, but you got to think about what can we do tomorrow, as a thought I had earlier in regards to my daughter, who's only 14 now, but what are we leaving for her and her friends and your grandchildren and all the others that are inheriting what we've put a lot of effort into, unfortunately, messing up. And so I think this is a wake-up call for us. Landscape architects have been talking about this for decades. How do we take back the streets? How do we go on road diets? A lot of the physical distancing elements shown in Mark's book is landscape architecture. I mean, we've been having these conversations for quite a long time. So I'm actually very hopeful and enthused to see more design professionals seeing that aspect and coming together to bring it to bear. How do we manage the risk? The risk is involved in everything, you know, and I do think that if we had managed our use of land for all of these centuries, we would have less risk because the animals would be where the animals want to be. So, just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. The only thing I was also thinking, in addition to the sort of necessity for people to take a kind of longer term vision relative to investment and where and how money should be apportioned, it also struck me that there may be existing opportunities in what might be seen as economic vulnerabilities that could be utilized in productive ways. So I guess when I'm thinking about the street, I live not that far from, you know, Fifth Avenue in New York, which used to be a, you know, obviously a thriving commercial corridor in the city. And for years before the pandemic, the storefronts were going vacant, right? So you have at the same time kind of surplus commercial real estate, office space that's now no longer marketable, that Linda referred to as well. In other words, there are, I think, maybe conditions in the relationship between kind of real estate markets, spatial availability, and maybe opportunities for thinking about those spaces in new ways that might be kind of economically leveraged and at the same time generate effects other than you know, what we're kind of used to or what we would anticipate.
Linda, I see you shaking your head vigorously up and down.
This fantastic conversation, and all the different perspectives are wonderful. And one of the things that we've really learned is if we collaborate together, and it seems with the pandemic, of course, the necessity to do this is at the extreme. And so the first time we're actually breaking barriers between our disciplines and actually working in a very multidisciplinary way. This also includes the owners of buildings who would hire us at certain points in the design process, but which is a missed opportunity. In this case, that's shifting so that the owners, this is part of their value proposition to their employees, is that all these aspects of safety and trust is now necessary to actually bring those employees back. So the cost of doing business has shifted so quickly. And if we could reapply that cost to other improvements that are necessary for the future, that is what we're looking at, is that shift of where the value is placed. And the employees are insisting on this shift of where the value is placed. So the economic opportunity is changing. So the economic and social and governance is really coming to the forefront of corporations and building owners. We need to jump in on that as quickly as possible, because as everyone has pointed out, we've been thinking about this for 40 years about the building stock. And that building stock was actually created in a large way 40 years ago. So it is, again, this collaborative effort in communication, and the shift of where value is placed is our opportunity today.
Hey, Linda, if I could just mention, we've seen an influx of new residents coming from the Northeast, Mark, a lot of them leaving New York, coming to South Florida. And I had a conversation with one of the economic development directors for West Palm Beach about this phenomenon. And she simply stated that, the two questions they're asking are, what are the building systems? Will we have fresh, clean air within our buildings? And the second question is, where are the parks? So it's pretty intriguing to see that our worlds are certainly coming together as they should have.
Mm-hmm.
Nienke, I want to bring you in on the conversation as well. The criticism of the kind of work that you have been doing, and not just you specifically, but many people who are doing this kind of design research, is that the high cost, partially because of the infrastructure embedded in making things in the old-fashioned way, means that these become luxury goods, only available for the few. Do you see a way out of that? Can we have a safe and sane world for everyone, not just for the rich?
Yes, that's definitely my goal. But I think there's still a lot that needs to change, also in rules and regulations. So, for example, my collaboration with the water authorities, it's toilet paper. It's something they have as a material for free, so it's cheap. But the Dutch government won't change the rules. They still see it as waste, and therefore they cannot sell the material or actually use it in any application. So it's a long process, I think, before all the necessary steps are made. It's a collaboration between governments, between industry, between designers, before all these sustainable new materials are available for the market or for everybody. But I think it's really happening, and I hope within 5 to 10 years it's a reality for everybody.
And what about the relationship between organic material and health? Do we take greater risks when we don't sterilize everything and use only plastic and actually let nature back into our world?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the idea of letting nature back in, not just from an organic perspective, but also because I think it's better for our health. As you can see with COVID-19, it stays alive longer on the smooth surfaces than the soft surfaces like textiles. I think maybe that's a sign that we need to incorporate more human materials again into our interiors, more natural wool materials that will make us feel safe or at home. I hope this crisis makes us realize that too.
Is it also, and this is a question also generally, is it a question of selling it, if you will? Linda, you talked a great deal about the methods of collaboration and research and how that could wind its way through to results. And Mark, you were very clear in saying that one of the strengths of LTL and what you also brought to this process was the techniques of architectural representation and making clear to us what is actually going on, and if you will, also representing what could go on. Is, I know that people often think that making things look good in design is just operating on skin deep and just selling stuff, but could the modes of architectural representation or industrial design, landscape, interior representation, could they be critical? Can they have the effect of actually proposing other worlds or changes that are possible? And if so, how could they do that?
I mean, we've kind of fundamentally always believed that one of the architect's role, I mean, I was just sort of saying I don't like to make predictions, but at some level to propose anything in the realm of design is to kind of indulge in prognostication, right? At some level, you're always projecting. A project is a projection into a speculative future at some level. So there's always an aspect of kind of looking forward. There's always a certain amount of science fiction in any piece of architectural design in that sense. And so I guess we've always been really interested in kind of invested in these questions of varying forms of representation and how that can bring new realities or kind of latencies into view. And with COVID specifically, it was this very tricky issue of how do you visualize the invisible, right? You have a pathogen that is not imageable from a kind of human perspective, and in a way that's part of it's part of the anxiety associated with it, right? With kind of pathogens like this, which is that they kind of elude easy representational, right? Kind of encapsulation, and therefore they present in a way a higher degree of unknowability, unpredictability, and uncertainty. So I think just being able to kind of understand what the spatial implications are and being able to kind of represent that. And also, I mean, at the kind of more pragmatic scale, but then I think as Kona and others have been alluding to, what that might mean in terms of rethinking our spaces, rethinking our cities, rethinking our landscapes. And from our perspective, that's one of the things that architects can do. We are not the experts on transmission, but we can render the implications of those, the best scientifically verifiable studies. We can render that in a way that it becomes legible, but also hopefully potentially productive. When we did the project for Rising Currents, I think one of the impulses behind that was to how could you take something as inhumanly incomprehensible as climate change and actually transform it through an architectural or kind of landscape or urban vision into something that people could both get their heads around, but also not just fear, but actually think about in a potentially productive way, right?
The other panelists have thoughts on this? I think Nienke, in your case, certainly making something out of the toilet paper that was beautiful, or out of the salmon skin is beautiful, is an important part of what you're doing, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think beauty, it makes you relate to a space or a product, or and that's always the first step in order to go deeper into the story or the idea behind it, and to commit to it. So yeah, I think beauty is always where it starts.
One thing I think that is beautiful is that we're all asking more questions now, and we're trying things that we thought we couldn't try before. I vividly remember several of my partners stating years ago that it was impossible to have someone working remote. Ha ha. We learned that very quickly, and it's amazing. We have been so much more productive. I think we're certainly busy right now, And we've given people the option to be a lot more flexible with their time and actually trust them. I think the word that was used before earlier by Linda, the whole idea of trust is super important, so that people can do what they do and not worry about being sort of micromanaged into doing it, because we're no longer going to factories, right? We don't have to punch time clocks. I mean, people can work from anywhere in the world. As a global company, we've been doing it for decades. And now all of a sudden, COVID taught us that, hey, we can actually reuse our space. We have lots of unused office space right now. I mean, it's ridiculous. And you go into the studio and, you know, people are extremely spread out, and we're rethinking that now. You know, what if our spaces become areas for collaboration, where you come in and work on something together in a team, and then you can move back and, you know, and go to your respective homes to really focus. Maybe it's a bring your own device type of situation, where it allows us to be a lot more flexible and do more. So I'm happy that people are finally asking, you know, the questions, you know, is there a better way? Because for some reason we thought there wasn't, and we and we didn't allow ourselves to try. And, you know, so I do believe this exploration is good for us.
Other comments in that?
You know, I think what we're starting to achieve, because we've had this isolation time to think, that what is the question of what brings you joy? And because of that question of joy, that will shift how people work and where they work and how they work and when they want to work. Because when you're thinking about aesthetics, that delight and joy becomes what you receive and what you desire. So this idea of going back to the empty space of the office is once again changing from the industrial age of the office worker in the Ford factory concept to one that will demand that connection to joy. And what provides that joy for most of us is the relationship with people and the relationship with nature. And that has been long studied, but not achieved because of the realm of productivity and control of your time by others. So this change of control of your time is, and tasting that and going with it is something that we will desire or demand when we go back to work. And management is now realizing that, again, that word of trust, can trust that employee, that remote worker, that they will actually do their work and even better. So to bring people back to that office, you'll have to provide that space of joy and desire. And only with that would be productive. And this, so that will change our office places. And that will change how they look and feel and provide those places for connection. Really, the only reason we want to go back is to be with people. And so is the office place the place that is broken up into the cubicles or workstations of isolated work? Probably not. It's going to be the place of interaction. And then your home office is going to be the place of your own control of your day and time. So it's flipping. And so that's what we're looking forward to seeing in the future.
I think perhaps it would be a good idea to end on the note of joy, and that we do hope to bring joy back into our design process, our design products and spaces and images, our design work as students and professionals and critics, and also into the world that has been so ground down, both through political and social, as well as health crises that we've all confronted. So I hope that we can think in that terms of the power of design to create joy. And with that, I want to thank our panelists, Kona Gray, Mark Tsurumaki, Nienke Hoogvliet, and Linda Sorrento. Go Hokies, indeed. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts and all of your openness to this discussion. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your generosity. And thank you also to our audience for sharing the last hour and a half with us. And with that, I hope you all have a pleasant evening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening.
Pleasure.